Hello guys and girls, and welcome to today's video. The purpose of this video that we're going to be doing today is to go over question number 16 on the district progress check that you all completed last week. Question number 16 was the extended response question, so we're going to be talking about what your response should have looked like to that question. Before we get into that, I want to make sure that you do have a copy of the paper that you see on the screen in front of you on your desk, and you are also going to make sure that you have a pencil and that your name is on your paper. And once you've done those things, we're going to be ready to rock and roll. Before we get into the actual question itself, I'm going to ask you in just a moment to pause this video, and you're actually going to go over to Edulastic, which is now called Pear Assessment, and you are going to check your score to question number 16. Let me explain what that's going to look like for you before you pause the video. Question number 16 was worth 4 points altogether. If you got 0 or 1 point on that question, that means you scored a novice. If you got 2 points on that question, you were apprentice, 3 points was proficient, and 4 points was distinguished. So what I'm going to ask you to do, like I said, go over to Edulastic, check your score, and then on your paper that you have in front of you, you are going to circle novice, apprentice, proficient, or distinguished based on how many points you were given on that question. I'm going to say it one more time. 0 or 1 point is novice, 2 points is apprentice, 3 points is proficient, 4 points is distinguished. So go ahead and pause the video, go check your score, circle your score on your paper, and then come back. So now that you have gotten a good idea of what your score was on question number 16, we're going to look at it a little more closely. This is what question number 16 looked like on the assessment. It says, explain how the author supports the argument that the reader does not need to worry about robots taking over the world. Support your answer with evidence from the text. The text is here on the left-hand side of the screen. It's the passage about the robot that they taught to play Jenga. I know that we read this passage together earlier this week, but I do want to look at it again today just to make sure we are all on the same page. So I'm going to ask that as I'm reading this to you, your eyeballs are on the screen, your pencil is down, and you are following along with me. MIT is teaching a robot to beat you at Jenga. Paragraph 1. You probably remember the rules of Jenga. You tap at a wooden block in the tower, try to remove it, and then hopefully place the piece back on top of the increasingly unstable creation. The first person to knock the tower over loses. Jenga. Jenga's physical nature makes it different from classic coffee table games like chess or Go, which are contests at which artificial intelligence already excels. As complex as those games are, Jenga poses its own unique challenges for a robot. Mechanical engineers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology have been working on a two-fingered bot that uses AI and sensors to figure out the physics of the game and play it. With a game like chess, you can glean all the information you need to play and hopefully win just by looking at the board. No one needs to poke at the knight on a chessboard to figure out if it's capable of moving. And with board games like that, AI software can learn rapidly in simulation. Jenga is different. You can't just look. You need to touch. You need to physically interact with it to actually get enough information to make a decision, says Nima Fazeli, a doctoral candidate and mechanical engineer at MIT, and the first author on a new paper in the journal Science Robotics describing the Jenga playing robot. Fazeli and his colleagues built a robot with two finger-like appendages it can use to push on a block and later grasp it. The machine relies on two sensors to perceive its Jenga-filled world, a camera that sees the tower and a force sensor in its wrist to know how hard it is pushing. While they had to build its gripper component, the arm itself is an off-the-shelf style robotic device. Through those sensors and machine learning techniques like neural networks, it was able to discern the physics of the game. The robot learned through experience. The eventual goal was for it to become good at predicting when it was a good idea to keep pushing or when it's a good idea to stop pushing, says Alberto Rodriguez, the paper's senior author and a professor of mechanical engineering at MIT. Through poking at blocks and seeing if they feel like they can move easily or not, or if the tower collapses, the robot can build nuggets of experience. That learning is what the robot can do thanks to artificial intelligence, although the engineers had to give it some basic information first. They told it that the goal of the game was to remove blocks and then place them on top. But the other stuff is autonomous. It decides on its own which block to push and which block to probe. It decides on its own how to extract them. And it decides on its own when it's a good idea to keep extracting them or to move to another one, says Rodriguez. It can give up on a specific block if it needs to, an important skill. But don't worry that the robot is going to show up at your door for your next game night and clobber you and your friends. Rodriguez says that the contraption is good enough so that it could play against a human, and it would be fun even if it is slow. But the research says an expert could still beat it. This is definitely not a project that was driven by trying to achieve superhuman performance, he adds. Worried about robots taking over the world? Take heart that while AI systems are great at board games like chess, they still need some work before easily clobbering us at a physical game of blocks. Jenga. Again, the question that we were asked to answer based on this passage is, explain how the author supports the argument that the reader does not need to worry about robots taking over the world. Support your answer with evidence from the text. We're going to go back to the paper that you should have on your desk, and we're actually going to look at an example response. Mr. Phelps, who created this assessment for us, actually came up with this response. The first thing that I want to point out about this is that we are using the ABE writing strategy. I would say most of us at least attempted to use the ABE writing strategy when you all responded to this question, which I was really happy about. But I also want to point out that when you get an extended response question like this on our state testing at the end of the year, the directions are not going to tell you that you have to write an ABE. I want you all to remember that we've gone over how to write an ABE many times this year because that is a great way to respond to these types of questions. So that is what I was first looking for when I was grading your all's sample responses. You're always going to start an ABE by restating the question, which I did here. The author supports the argument that readers don't need to worry about robots taking over the world by. Now, I want you guys to remember that with the ABE writing strategy, we always start with an answer and a because. Please fill in the word answer and because on the left-hand column up here at the top on your paper. And I'll just go ahead and add that if I type anything in red on my copy, you need to be writing it on your paper. Now, usually we try to incorporate the word because into our answer, but for this specific question, it made more sense to use the word by than the word because. So I do have the word by here instead of the word because, and that's okay. It just made more sense when I was restating this question. So I'm going to start back at the beginning. The author supports the argument that readers don't need to worry about robots taking over the world by explaining that humans are the ultimate creators and controllers of robots. When I was looking at your all's responses to this question, it didn't have to be word for word the same as my answer, but I was hoping to see something similar. The idea that robots are created by humans, they have to be programmed by humans, therefore they can't take over the world unless a human were to program them to do that, and robots just really aren't advanced enough at this point for that to happen. So every response I was looking for an answer and a because. If we follow along ABE, we know that the next thing that we need is an E1. Our E1 is our evidence. When I was looking at your all's evidence, I was hoping to see a good sentence starter like the text says. And then I wanted to see something that you cited directly from the text. I will tell you guys, when it came to citing your evidence, the best place to look was in the last couple of paragraphs of the text, because this is where it was actually pretty much telling us straight up, hey, you don't have to worry about these robots showing up at your door. So the best place to look for your evidence was actually at the end of the passage. I chose the piece of evidence that said the learning is what the robot can do thanks to artificial intelligence, although the engineers had to give it some basic information first. So remember in my answer, I stated robots are not going to take over the world because humans create them and program them. So the evidence that I used supported that idea. I gave a piece of information that showed that they had to program these robots first. Again, the biggest things I was looking for when I was grading yours was a good sentence starter like the text says, and then also making sure you cited your evidence correctly. After your E1, you are jumping straight into your E2. I had a pretty good amount of people who I wrote on your test that I just wanted some more information in your E2. I want you guys to remember that when you're writing your E2, you're not just repeating what the evidence says, you are explaining the evidence. And a great way to start your E2 is with a sentence like, this evidence proves, or this evidence shows, and then you explain in at least 2 sentences in your own words how your E1 supports your answer. So this one says, this evidence proves robots must be programmed by humans before they can function. Without engineers doing this programming, robots can't operate and therefore couldn't possibly take over the world. After my first E1 and E2, we're going to have an internal transition. And I know, guys, that the space that I gave you to write that was not the biggest, so just do your best. And then after your internal transition, you're going to have another E1. I did have some people on your test who stopped after your first E1 and E2. And remember, anytime we're doing an A written response or responding to an ERQ, we are looking for 2 pieces of evidence and then 2 explanations. Again, we have to have an internal transition, so I was looking for something like furthermore or additionally, and then another piece of evidence that was cited from the text. So I put, the author also states, I have my quotation marks, take heart that while AI systems are great at board games like chess, they still need some work before easily clobbering us at a physical game of blocks. And then I have my closing quotation marks. Just remember, guys, that when you are citing evidence, it needs to be word for word from the text. After my next E1, I am, of course, jumping into my E2, where I'm explaining my evidence. Remember, E2 should be at least 2 sentences. This evidence further demonstrates that robots are far from conquering humans. Although they may have the ability to beat us at chess or compete against us in Jenga, they do not have the strength or intellect to actually take over the world. Humans are far more advanced than our current robot creations. And then at the end, I was looking for a concluding sentence. Remember, the job of the concluding sentence is to just wrap up your thoughts for the paragraph. So I put, although it would be fun to play a board game against a robot, the author clearly demonstrates that there is no need to worry about them taking over the world. So I basically just summarized what I had in my answer up at the top. When it's all said and done, this is what I was hoping for with your ERQs. An answer and a because, 2 E1s, 2 E2s, and a concluding sentence, and it should have been a complete paragraph. If it was, great. Hopefully your score reflected that. If it wasn't, that just tells us something that we need to work on in the future. Make sure that this looks like, your copy looks like my copy, and then you're going to flip your paper over to the back. There is one more step to this assignment today. I have a reflection question for you, so everyone's answers to this are going to be different. It's based on your own opinion and your own experience. I want you one more time to go back to EdgeElastic, aka Pear Assessment, and take a look at what you typed for your ERQ. I want you to look at the example that we just did together, and I want you to tell me something that you could have done to make your answer stronger. Did you need to give more detail in your E2? Did you leave out your second piece of evidence? Did you not cite evidence directly from the text? I don't know. It's up to you. It depends on what you typed on EdgeElastic, but I want you to check that out and then finish question number 3 by telling me what you could have done to make your answer better. If you scored a distinguished on the ERQ on question number 16, that means you got 4 out of 4 points. You may skip this question. Once you have finished this reflection question, there is one more assignment for you to do today. There is actually a video version of the lottery, and it's posted on Google Classroom. So after you finish question number 3, you're going to go back to Google Classroom and watch that Ed puzzle. Hope you guys have a great day and a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you guys on Monday.